So in a change to our regularly scheduled programming, I thought we'd all talk about the same topic this week, but from different angles, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Backups, you should do them. You really should do them, is the overriding message you should get from this. And I want to talk about how I do backups, and then you guys can talk about yours. So I'll start with mine. Most of my systems are Linux. Laptops, desktops, servers, they're all Linux. And so they pretty much all reside in my house or are remotely accessible via SSH. So I've got a few servers out there in the cloud. I only have one location. I'm not backing up from lots of places other than out there on the internet. And so for many years, I've used the same tool for doing backups, and it's called rsnapshot. And it's been around a long time. It's a little bit quirky, and it's a little bit weird to set up. But once it's set up, it's pretty much fire and forget. So I have a server upstairs in the loft at home, and that's running rsnapshot. So it has a regular cron job to run rsnapshot. In fact, it has 4 cron jobs to run rsnapshot. And what it does is the configuration for rsnapshot tells it which machines to back up remotely. And it does that over SSH as root. So it has the SSH keys all set up so that that machine can SSH to any system as root and access the file system of that remote system. And then it copies that, all the files from that remote system onto the server at home. And it does that on a regular basis for multiple machines. So it wakes up every few hours and backs up my laptop, my desktop, my web server, a game server I'm running, and all kinds of other machines. And the neat thing about rsnapshot is it uses rsync over SSH, and it only backs up changed or new files. So it's not doing a full backup every single time. The first backup takes a long time because it backs up everything that you specify. And you don't have to back up the whole system. You can just back up certain folders. So I only back up certain important folders. But the important part is it runs on a regular basis and backs up all the files on all the systems. And it works.
And do you just get one backup of whatever the latest state is, or does it do some sort of time window where you can go back and say, I need to know what it was yesterday or something like that?
Yeah, it's configurable.
Right.
So the way I have it set up is that it runs every 6 hours and it keeps a certain number of those backups. When it gets to the limit of however many you set, let's say it's 6, it renames the oldest one to another name, and they're called alpha, beta, delta, gamma. And so the alpha backups, I've got 6 alpha backups, and then when it starts the next one and it sees there are already 6 that have been done over the last 6 backups, it takes the oldest one and renames it beta.0. And then away we go again, and it does another backup. And then the next time it runs, beta 0 gets renamed beta 1 until we have enough beta backups. And then the oldest beta backup gets renamed delta, and then the oldest delta one gets renamed gamma. The net result of that is I have backups going quite far back, but I only keep 7 of the most recent ones. And then the others are daily. The beta ones are daily, and then the older ones are weekly, and then the older ones than that are monthly. So I effectively have hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, roughly. But because I don't back up every hour, it's not actually hourly. It's every 6 hours, and then every day, and then every week, and then every month. So I go back like 6 months, maybe a year of backups, but not every single backup. It's not like ZFS snapshots. It's a delta taken at a snapshot in time at some point over the last year. And I've been doing this for years on all my systems, and it has saved my bacon a bunch of times where I've aggressively deleted files off of a laptop and then wanted to go and find them, or needed to go and find some configuration file from a year ago because I've had to redeploy something or something like that. And there are certainly better ways to do it. It's not the fastest backup in the world because the way it copies the files from alpha 0 to alpha 1 and then alpha 1 to alpha 2, it takes a lot of time to do that copying. It's basically CP a folder to another folder. It does save space by using hard links, so you don't end up with lots of duplicate copies of the same files. But if you modify a lot of files, then a lot of files get changed and a lot of files get backed up. But I basically don't look at it very often because whenever I look at the log file, it's just working and it has done for years. And so it's good old reliable rsnapshot. And I'm quite happy with it. And when I've ever needed to get files from it, they've been there, and that's kept me very happy.
And I think that's a critical piece, right? Because people talk about making backups, and I've spoken to people about the rigor with which they take backups. And I was like, what's the restore process like? And they're like, no, well, I've never really tested it. It's like,
yeah.
Well, should probably do that because you may just have a load of garbage.
Yeah. And I've restored like entire folders full of music and, folders full of PDFs and stuff. It's not just individual files, but it's all there going back over a year. And I've recently been getting rid of some of my old backups because I just don't need them anymore. Like I'm on my 4th generation of laptop that I've been using rsnapshot on with this server, and it's keeping all those old laptop snapshots there. I call them snapshots. They're backups, really. And so every time it's copying alpha 0 to alpha 1 and alpha 1 to alpha 2, it's copying not only my current laptop, but the previous laptop and the laptop before that, because all those backups are still sat on the server. They're all in one big folder, which means it's super time consuming copying a whole bunch of files that are never going to change because those laptops don't exist anymore. So I think there's ways I could improve this, but I'm too far down the line of using it. I'd have to just replace it completely, I think.
Right. And you said you do your incrementals at like every 6 hours.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea how long it takes your incremental backup to run?
That's a good question. So the most recent one that started at 4:00 today took an hour to RM the oldest alpha backup, and then it took less than a minute to move all of the alpha backups up one. It moves, not copies.
Yeah.
And then to copy alpha 0 to alpha 1 took an hour and 10 minutes. And then actually doing the backups took 15 minutes. Not long at all. So the actual backup, the diff of what has changed since midday to 4:00 on all of those systems is 15 minutes worth of copying files over the network. But the prep took over an hour to do. So it's horribly inefficient. Now, bear in mind, this is running on an 8th gen HP micro server with 4 aging 4 terabyte drives in them. I could probably buy a Synology with 1 12 terabyte drive and it would just be like insanely fast. But that's where we are. That's the system I've got. And I don't really want to go buying a whole load of more infrastructure for backups. And I should note, I probably didn't explain it particularly well. I have got a blog post. If you just do a search for Popey rsnapshot, you'll find my blog from a couple of years ago where I explained this in much more detail about how it all works and how it fits together. And I'll link it in the show notes.
I too have used rsnapshot very happily for many years, but I'm here to tell you resistance is futile. Borg backup is here to replace rsnapshot.
Okay.
So I have recently done the very thing that you were posturing. I have completely replaced my backup solution with Borg backup. And I suppose it's important to summarize why I decided to replace rsnapshot after so many years of being happy with it.
Is it anything to do with the reasons that I gave about it being slow and,
yes,
and a little bit cumbersome? Yeah, I thought it might be.
Yeah. So I use rsnapshot to do 2 types of backups. One to do backups of my home directory, and that is to protect me from when I do a silly and I go and delete a bunch of stuff accidentally that I really didn't mean to delete and I need to recover it. And I also use it to back up my servers, which is mostly static content. It's videos and music and things of that nature and some other stuff. And I'll get into that in a bit later. But those workstation backups of my home directory, I've got terabytes of data and millions of files, and rsnapshot takes a long time to run, even on very, very fast all NVMe storage solutions for the source where the data resides and the target to where it is being backed up. So spinning rust is not the only limiting factor here. It is just a inefficient process. So I wanted to be able to take snapshots of my data at much more frequent intervals to give me more tight restore points.
More silly factor. Yes.
For when I inevitably RM something in the wrong place and destroy hours of work. So I was thinking I would switch my file systems to ZFS and get into ZFS replication. And you know what? Life's too short for that, for your laptops and your trivial stuff at home. Getting into balancing ZFS and doing storage architectures and all of this sort of thing. And I don't trust B3FS. Send your hate mail to joe@latenightlinux.com. It's bitten me and I'm not going back there. And XFS I love, but XFS is missing some features that would be good for a backup solution. Like there's no native compression on the file system, for example, something that you can do with B3FS. So I wanted to find a solution that enabled me to keep XFS, which I trust and I like, but also faster than rsnapshot, more space efficient than rsnapshot. But you talked about like how convenient the restore is from rsnapshot, because you can just go to an any point in time version and all of your stuff is there.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I also love, as you say, when rsnapshot is configured, it just hums along and it does its job. And I wanted that. So Borg backup is all of these things. So it is very fast, much faster than my rsnapshots, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But the space efficiency is interesting because it does deduplication as well as compression. So when you create a repository for your backups, you can say what compression you want to use on that repository. So I've created 2 repositories, one which is a target for stuff that is probably going to compress well, like my documents and general data. And I have another one where I have no compression applied, which is where the music backups and the video backups and the photo backups go to, because you get little to no benefit from recompressing those things. And it just adds to the time the backups take. In addition, it has a very simple means of encrypting your data. And at some point in the future, I want to get to sending another copy of my backups to some off-site place. I've currently got the office in town and the server here, so I have 2 places, but I'd like something that's completely separate as well. And the restore process for Borg is very elegant. You have, they call them archives, but it's basically a point-in-time backup, and you can just say, go and mount that, and it uses fuse mounting, and it suddenly just appears just like a directory anywhere on your system. And you can then use rsync to copy a bunch of files or the whole thing. But you don't, it's not like the old days of backup software where you have some way of saying, right, extract this whole backup
Put a
over
tape
here.
in the drive.
Yeah. You just basically mount the point-in-time backup that you're interested in, and then you can restore some or any files that you want out of there back over the target, just like I would do with rsnapshot. So I love that. So because of all of these reasons, it has replaced rsnapshot for me, and I'm using it for my workstation backups to do regular snapshots of my home directory. And that also includes backing up my Keybase folder. So I have got data in Keybase for projects that I work on with other people where we keep secrets that we want to share with members of the project. But I also want to have backups of that stuff in case Keybase ever disappears, right? So it's able to peek inside there, but the backup is encrypted. So, right. I now have a great way to back that stuff up. And my workstation backups are many terabytes and many millions of files. And my incremental backups now take 30 seconds. So I am now doing hourly backups. So Mark was asking about retention earlier. My retention for my home directory is I have 24 hourly backups. I have 7 dailies, 4 weeklies, 6 monthlies and 1 annual. Now, I've only been using this for about 4 weeks at the moment, so I don't have that history of stuff yet. And then I'm using it on the server as well. And the server's doing, backups of the music and the videos. But what I also have is a headless version of Dropbox running on the server. And I back up our Dropbox folder as well. So if Dropbox ever goes away or something disastrous happens, I now have our Dropbox stuff backed up. And I think what's worth pointing out here is that you can completely automate Borg backup itself from the command line in much the same way you would with rsnapshot. But there are some front ends that make it even more palatable and straightforward to use. So on my workstations, I'm using a bit of software called Vorta, which is a graphical application that is dead simple to use, and you can create backup archives very, very quickly and say what you want to back up. It has a simple mechanism of excluding. So I touch a file in any folders that I don't want to back up. I just create a hidden file called .nobackup, and Borg sees that and goes, well, I don't back this one up. So if I've got things I want to exclude, it's easy to do. So I'm using Vorta on the workstation. It sits in the indicator area with all of the other things, and it glows red when it's doing its backups, and you can click on it. And if you want to restore, you can just click in the list of backups and say mount it, and it just appears as a Fuse file system in your file browser, and you can go and poke around and look in it and all that sort of thing.
That is super neat. It does. That Vorta does look. The video on their homepage is on a Mac, so I assume the Linux version looks exactly the same.
Exactly the same.
Right.
And as you point out, this will work on Mac, Linux, and Windows. So, like you, I only care about Linux, but if there are people out there who have got a mixture of machines in their home and they want a solution that can work everywhere, then Borg plus Vorta will give you that. And then on the server, I'm using a utility called Borgmatic, which basically presents as a YAML file where you configure what you want to back up. And it's just a much simpler interface to drive Borg itself. So that's what I'm using. And I don't have 10 years of experience with it like I do with rsnapshot, but so far it's giving me the rsnapshot experience that I've enjoyed, but it's quicker, faster, using less disk space as well.
Nice.
And when you have Borg installed on remote endpoints over SSH, it can accelerate the backups over SSH by virtue of having Borg on both ends of the connection. So it's not just doing like a file system transaction. It actually has a protocol between the two, the client and the server. So it's very, very fast remotely as well.
Is Borg installable as a deb on Linux and as a packages for everything?
I'm going to say yes. I'm obviously using it on NixOS. It's working fine here. I have seen that the guides talk about the many Linuxes that it's available for.
Right. Cool.
And it's sponsored by borgbase.com, who are basically a hosting company that offer you remote storage, and also Hertzner offer storage box solutions, which are Borg enabled. So if you want an off-site solution, there are hosting providers that support the project by providing you with cloud-based storage that is accelerated for Borg.
Okay, sold. Linux Matters is part of the Late Night Linux family. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting us and the rest of the Late Night Linux team using the PayPal or Patreon links at linuxmatters.sh/support. For $5 a month on Patreon, you can enjoy an ad-free feed of our show, or for $10, get access to all the Late Night Linux shows ad-free. You can get in touch with us via email, show@linuxmatters.sh, or chat with other listeners in our Telegram group. All the details are at linuxmatters.sh/contact.
My backup solution's a bit different because I think the main use case I'm thinking of is a bit different. I'm not thinking about backing up entire machines or my entire home directory all the time in case I mess something up. I'm more thinking about what are the things that are crucial for my family to make sure that we never lose, which are things like our family photos. And currently we have quite a good system within the house whereby our photos are instantly uploaded from our phones to our Nextcloud server and synced between all the devices which talk to that. So we've got plenty of copies of them around the house. If one machine goes pop, nothing's getting lost. But were there to be a complete disaster and all the machines get lost somehow, I wanted to have some sort of further offsite backup that I could do. And I've been thinking about the same sort of things that we've already been talking about, not just how do I back it up and do it easily and make sure it's encrypted, but also what's the recovery process like? How easy is it to test the recovery process after just doing your first backup? And I recently discovered a tool called Rclone. And Rclone is a similar sort of tool. It will synchronize files from machine to a machine, but the way it does it is quite clever and really flexible and gives you a lot of interesting options to cover a lot of different cases. So the way it works is it gives you a load of essentially options for pluggable backends. And that could be somewhere on a file system. It could be somewhere over SSH or SFTP or, any other sort of network protocol. But it could also be any other way there is of storing files remotely. And that could include something like S3 object storage, even something like WebDAV or IMAP or anything which could feasibly store a file. You could create an Rclone backend to do it. So in my case, I've gone with an S3 compatible option. I've actually gone with iDrive E2 storage because they sponsor Rclone. And I thought if I'm going to give money to someone, I may as well give it to people who support the project. So that's good. Yeah, you can just use the generic S3 backend and point at any provider that supports that API, or there's a few which support a version of the API like Backblaze that have their own backend. But because this is all, private family stuff, I wanted to make sure it was encrypted. And the way that Rclone handles things like that is, as well as these things which are actually a backend for storing files somewhere, there's a set of sort of meta backends for doing other things. So there's one called Union, which will take a load of backends and stick them together as though they were one backend. So you might have a load of small accounts across various providers, but you want to just back up to them somehow, use that storage as a blob, or have multiple accounts and back up your stuff to all of those at once. And there's, backends for doing that by putting them in front of the real backends. And similarly with encryption, the way that you do that is you create your backend for where you're actually storing the files. Then you create an encryption backend, which points to the real backend. And then you back up to the encryption backend, which then transparently does all of that basically. And the process is exactly the same. Like you've got all of these commands in Rclone for doing various things, and they all work the same, whichever backend you're using.
Nice.
I've been aware of Rclone for some time, and it's been on my list of things to take a proper look at, and I've never got round to it. But the way that I've understood it is it's like rsync for cloud storage.
Yes. I mean, that's basically how it operates, but it's cloud storage and any other storage.
Right.
You could equally use it with another server on your LAN, or just files locally if you wanted to.
So you could use it like rsync.
Like rsync, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So the killer question is, what happens if you need to restore a file? How do you get stuff back?
So the backing up is simple. I've got a cron job which says take this directory and clone it to this backend, and that's all I need to tell Rclone. It does that however often I want it to. And you see, if you look at the bucket in the object storage, you just see a bunch of encrypted file names. But here's the clever bit. Like Borg, you have the option on your machine where Rclone is running to say mount this backend, and you get it mounted as a directory.
Nice.
So you can do that. You can also say take this backend and expose it over whatever remote protocol. So you could have it on your server. You could have Rclone running on your server, but say actually give me that as a WebDAV mount, and then from somewhere else on your network you could do the same thing. You could also take the same config file from the server that's doing the backups and put that on another machine like your laptop, and then run the same command to mount that backend, and it'll do that on your local machine. But aside from doing all of this on the command line, you also get the option of running a web GUI, which is actually what I used to do the configuration. So you have an interactive CLI for adding remotes, and then the CLI commands for running it. But you can also do it all through quite a decent, although it describes itself as an experimental web front end, which you run You do rclone rcd -- web GUI on whichever machine has the config file that you want. And then as well as setting it all up like that, you get the option to browse any of the remotes. So I can go in there and I can say, show me my backup destination, and it will show me the real file names and the real files. And then I can just click on one and download it. Or I can basically manage all of the mounts that I've got. So I can, from there, I can say mount this, and then that appears in my file manager and I can browse it. At the moment, in terms of historical backups, the way I've approached that is using S3 versioning. So if I have files that I delete, they'll be retained as a version, or if they get updated, I'll get a new version of them in the bucket, which I can then expose through Rclone, the old versions as well as the current version. This is still evolving. I've only put this in place recently, and I'm currently only doing, just our family photos at the moment to see how it goes and how much it's going to cost. But it's certainly something I'm considering expanding to the other important things.
I find it interesting that you don't care so much about like non-family photos or like your home directory or anything like that.
If my home directory blows up, I can reinstall and start again. I don't, handcraft my dot files like Martin does.
I used to do that, but now I don't have to because I have everything powered by Nix. So when I come to restore or recover a machine, which I did recently, I reinstalled my laptop. The install process gives me an install fully configured, including all of the directories in my home directory where my data lives. So then I just imported my Vorta backup profile and ran a restore, and I was back up and running. And that whole process from install to fully restored system was under an hour.
Nice.
Which is really nice. But like you, Mark, the server backup is backing up our important stuff. So we have SyncThing on all of our laptops with our documents and our photos. So like you, everything's in multiple places. But because we've now got this magical internet LAN, if I delete something in SyncThing, it almost instantaneously gets deleted from everyone else's machine, which is why I wanted this bulletproof backup sitting on top of it.
It's interesting that you say about installing your system from scratch and then restoring from the most recent backup that you have in Borg. And now I think about it, if I get a new laptop, I do a clean install and I cherry pick a few things out of the backups of my previous laptop, like my music collection, for example, and maybe a couple of other folders, and everything else I use SyncThing for. And I'm thinking, I actually back up a tremendous amount of stuff that I am never, ever going to restore. Like there's a whole truckload of stuff, like the .cache folder and the .local in my home. I am almost guaranteed never to want to restore an old browser profile cache folder. That's just not going to happen. So I think I need to optimize my backups a little bit better.
So I used to do exactly what you're describing with rsnapshot. I would just say back up my home directory, .files, the whole thing. And then, as you say, be selective in the restore process. I only need the documents folder and the downloads folder and this and that. But now with Borg, I've changed my strategy to say these are the directories that have data in it that I want to back up. And it really is data. It is user data, not configuration anymore. Definitely not caches. So when I do a restore, I know that's all of the stuff that I want.
I don't trust myself. I don't trust myself that I would pick all the right folders and then somewhere down the line I would create a folder in my home and it's never been backed up. That's my problem. I don't trust myself to put things in the right place. Maybe I need more discipline with my backups.
So that's how we're all doing our backups. Is anyone else out there doing it differently? We'd be interested to hear what your solutions are. In particular, I would like to hear what people are doing for backing up and viewing their family photos. I have a suboptimal solution at the moment. Your help finding a new solution would be most welcome.